Welcome to the Great Detectives of Old Time Radio. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham. If you have a comment, email it to me, box13 at greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives, and check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/greatdetectives. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software. A reminder, if you've not already, I do encourage you to check out my ebooks, All I Needed to Know I Learned from Columbo, and All I Needed to Know I Learned from Dragnet. Each examine the careers and history of 7 fictional policemen and detectives and life lessons that can be learned from them. They are available as audiobooks through audible.com or also wherever fine ebooks are sold. But now it is time for this week's episode of Mr. Chameleon. The original air date, July 27th, 1949, and the title is The Case of Murder and the Scar-Faced Man.
Next, Mr. Chameleon and the Case of Murder and the Scar-Faced Man. Tonight, we again present the famous Mr. Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters in his famous cases of crime and murder, brought to you by the makers of genuine Bayer aspirin. Mr. Chameleon, as you know, is the famous and dreaded detective who frequently uses a disguise to track down a killer, a disguise which at all times is recognized by the audience. Tonight, we give you Mr. Chameleon in the Case of Murder and the Scar-Faced Man. In New York, in many a boardroom, big business executives meet to direct their industries. And such a meeting is now taking place in a boardroom high above the city. The only difference being that these executives deal in crime, and that this conference will plunge Mr. Chameleon into one of his most deadly cases. And the president of this incorporated crime ring is saying to his associates,
"We're gathered here because one of our colleagues is betraying us."
What do you mean betraying us?
This traitor is the Scar-Faced Man.
No, it couldn't be the Scar-Faced Man.
The Scar-Faced Man has been stealing millions of dollars worth of dope from us. He's organized a gang of murderers to distribute and sell it.
What do you want us to do?
I say the Scar-Faced Man must be killed, and killed tonight.
Yes, that's what I think, too.
I see you agree. The Scar-Faced Man will be killed tonight.
And so it is that next morning we find Mr. Chameleon, the astute and dreaded detective, with Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold, kneeling in the street, examining the body of a murdered man. And Chameleon is saying,
"This murdered man's head has almost been severed from his body by machine gun fire.
Mm-hmm.
And he's dreadfully scar-faced, Dave.
Yeah.
And he didn't have one, but 2 kinds of scars.
What do you mean, Mr. Chameleon?
Here, look, Dave. Here's one scar deep down in the cheek. You see, near the nose and the ears. Those are plastic surgery scars.
Hey, so they are.
Let's have a look at his hands, Dave. I thought so. The tips of every one of his fingers have been burned. Nothing but a smooth burn scar.
No fingerprints.
A crook, deliberately mutilated, so he can't identify him. Oh, look who's coming, Dave. Billy Wright, the ex-con. Billy?
You still remember me, Mr. Chameleon? It's 10 years since you put me in stir.
Of course, Billy Wright. What are you doing here?
Well, after I got out, I went to the Transcontinental Trade School. That's a school to help ex-convicts. I got a job there. I still live at this school. There it is, right there.
Yes, so I see. I asked, what are you doing here?
Oh, I was just passing by.
I imagine. Billy, do you know the murdered man?
No, not me, Mr. Chameleon.
This is murder. Funny that you should just be passing by I think I'll take you in, Billy.
No, you can't do that to me. I hardly even know Haggerty.
Haggerty. The man's name is Haggerty. How did you know him?
Well, he lived at the trade school. He had a good job. He was boss ironwork at the Transcontinental Engineering Company.
It's an odd similarity in names. The trade school for ex-convicts is called Transcontinental, and the murdered Scarface worked at the Transcontinental Engineering Company. Billy, what's the connection?
Well, the trade school's a charity of the Transcontinental Engineering Company.
Transcontinental Engineering's a pretty big outfit, Mr. Chameleon. Good
Dave?
reputation.
You stay here while I go to the Transcontinental Engineering offices. If the scar-faced man worked there, his bosses ought to know something about him. I'm Chameleon of Central Police Headquarters. You're Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ehlers, the heads of Transcontinental Engineering.
We are, Mr. Chameleon. What can we do for you?
I'm here because a scar-faced man was found murdered around the corner near the trade school for ex-convicts, which you support as a charity. He worked for your company as a boss ironworker under the name of Haggerty.
Amazing. How in the world did you find out so quickly, Mr. Chameleon?
Oh, the newspaper said there was no identification of the murdered man.
It was very simple. An ex-convict I know happened to be passing by, and he identified Scarface for me.
Oh, I see.
Was his information correct, Mr. Kimberly?
Yes, we had a Haggerty working for us, and he had a scarred face, didn't he, Ellis?
Well, Kimberly and I don't have much contact with the workman, Mr. Chameleon. We can send the foreman down to identify the body if you wish.
Good, Mr. Ehlers. I would like to ask you something else.
Certainly, Mr. Chameleon.
Your charity, the Trade School for Ex-Convicts. I'd like to look around there to see what information I can pick up, Mr. Kimberly.
Mr. Chameleon, you don't think this affair could be connected in any way
Let
with
us hope for the best. However...
But, of course, Mr. Chameleon, make whatever investigation you care to at the school.
Thank you, Mr. Kimberly. Mr. Ehlers, I shall be on my way then. Goodbye.
Goodbye, Mr. Chameleon.
You see, Kimberly? I told you to have more sense about where you had Scarface bumped off.
Oh, shut up,
You
Ellis.
should have been smart enough to have the job done further away. No. Had to be smack in front of the Transcontinental Trade School setup.
How should I know Chameleon would identify the body so fast? Scarface wasn't an easy guy to identify with that plastic surgery and no fingerprints.
All right, Kimberly. But it's landed us on one of the hottest spots we've ever been.
Well, don't worry, Ellis. We're organized for just this kind of emergency. Well, what are you doing now, Ellis? Looking through the telescope?
I'm looking for that ship, the Etonia. She's due.
Well, quit it. You make me nervous.
You ought to be nervous, Kimberly. We've got a nifty setup here. A view of the harbor and North River, a telescope to check incoming ships, and a big organization to handle the dope from those ships. Took us a long time to get here, and I don't want it torn apart now by Chameleon.
You're an old lady, Ellis.
Well, I think we ought to stop that shipment of dope coming in on the Etonia until Chameleon stops snooping around.
It's too late to stop it now. Any minute we'll hear from our special contact and when the stuff's arriving.
And I don't like Chameleon finding out about Scarface so fast.
Nor do I, Ellis. Maybe some of our boys in the trade school have been working with Scarface. Yeah, that would explain this fellow tipping off Chameleon.
We better get rid of the double-crossers, Kimberly.
We're heading for the rocks if we don't.
We've got to wipe out any of the trade school birds who are pally with Scarface before Chameleon gets them to talk.
If we put Chameleon out before he gets to them, he won't talk either.
Are you nuts, Kimberly?
No, only a good businessman.
Meanwhile, Mr. Chameleon is at the Transcontinental Trade School talking to an ex-convict named Grimes, and Mr. Chameleon is saying...
Grimes, I understand Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ehlers of Transcontinental Engineering support this trade school for ex-convicts.
Yeah, that's right, Mr. Chameleon. Two fine men.
Grimes, in your job, you must know plenty that goes on here. You got any leads on the Scarface killing?
No, I'm sorry, Mr. Chameleon. I don't know a thing.
No? Seems to me that the place is pretty empty. Where is everyone, Grimes?
Search me. Oh, maybe the boys are having a party somewhere.
Mr. Chameleon,
Detective Sergeant Arnold. What is it, Dave?
I've got something to tell you in private, Mr. Chameleon.
Oh, over here. What is it, Dave?
There have been developments. The police heard machine gun fire from an old warehouse. When they broke in, they found 4 men shot. All of them dead but one.
4, Dave? Well, it's a massacre. This one man who wasn't dead, did he...
He just mumbled something about being called to a meeting before he went out.
Dave, were the murdered men students or occupants of this trade school?
They were, Mr. Chameleon. With his last breath, the dying man said trade school.
The murder of Scarface is more than an ordinary murder case, Dave. It's big business. Organized crime.
Where do we go from here?
We don't. We stay right here at the trade school.
Seems to me by setting up this ex-convict school, Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ellers have only made it easy for criminals to organize under a clever leader. Sure going to be a disappointment to them.
And more trouble for us. We've got to go to the top.
Any ideas?
Not one, Dave. We'll separate and each of us question the men here at the trade school. Talk to everyone. See what you can find out. Good luck, Dave.
Same to you, Mr. Chameleon. Hey, you, Billy Wright.
Detective Sergeant Arnold.
That was a good tip you gave, Mr. Chameleon, identifying Scarface, Billy.
Yeah.
Billy, do you know anything else that'll help?
Well, I know Mr. Chameleon thinks I got something to do with this murder just because I happen to be passing by on the street.
Well?
Look into a dame called Mrs. Essex Smith.
Essex Smith?
She's a famous old crow, a real society dame.
How does she come into it,
That's
Billy?
all I'm saying, Detective Arnold.
Thanks, Billy. This an outside phone?
Yeah.
Call Central Police Headquarters and report on this Mrs. Essex Smith.
Hang up that phone, Arnold.
Crime!
Hang it up, Arnold, or I'll plug you. You double-crosser, Billy. Take this.
Grimes,
Not so fast, Grimes.
Are you trying to jump me, Arnold?
You won't get away with this, Grimes, Mr. Chameleon.
Chameleon better keep his nose out. All right, Detective Sergeant Arnold. March. Out that door. We're going to take care of you. Take him away, boys. Now pull out Billy Wright's body. You know what to do with Dave Arnold.
Grimes! Grimes!
Oh, Mr. Chameleon, I didn't see you.
What were those shots?
Shots? I didn't hear any.
Don't give me that, Grimes. Where's Detective Arnold?
How should I know?
Well, he came in here to talk to you.
Yeah, an hour ago, he
Someone
went.
has been shot here, Grimes. If it was Dave Arnold...
Oh, you're crazy. There were no shots.
What have you done with the body? Is it in this closet? Empty. What have you done to Dave Arnold, Grimes?
Nothing, I tell you.
You're lying.
You're hearing things, Mr. Chameleon. Shots. You got too much imagination.
What's that blood on the floor?
Oh, one of the boys cut his finger. Now, you lay off. Maybe your pal Arnold went back to headquarters.
I'll try them on this phone. I'll give you that chance.
And if you want me, come and get me. I ain't staying here with a crazy dick who hears shots.
You won't get far, Grimes.
Hello?
Hello, Commissioner. This is Chameleon.
Oh, yes. What is it, Chameleon?
Have you heard anything from Dave Arnold?
No, not a thing.
Something's happened to Dave, Commissioner. If they've killed him, Wait a minute, Commissioner.
What is it, Chameleon? Chameleon!
Found a piece of paper here beside the phone. There's a name written on it in Dave's handwriting.
What name?
Mrs. Essex Smith. I know that name. Mrs. Essex Smith is a society leader.
Yes, and she's no phony, Chameleon. The Essex Smiths are an old family.
Well, I'm going over there anyway, Commissioner. Maybe they didn't get Dave. Maybe that's where he went.
Well, mind your step, Chameleon. Be careful.
Yeah?
These men in the Scarface killing are deadly, and it won't do anybody any good if you get killed looking for Dave.
I intend to find Dave, Commissioner. This outfit has got to be broken up. It's a big, efficient business, a crime syndicate. And I'll get that leader, believe me.
Mr. Chameleon and the case of murder and the scar-faced man continues in just a moment. When you have an ordinary headache, fast relief is important. But even more important is gentle, dependable relief. And that's why it'll pay you to always use genuine Bayer aspirin. For Bayer aspirin is one thing you can take with complete confidence. No other pain reliever can match Bayer aspirin's record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. Yes, for the two most important kinds of relief, always use genuine Bayer aspirin. Because it's actually ready to go to work in 2 seconds, it will bring you the fast relief you want. And because it's reliable, you can take it sure in the knowledge that it'll bring you the gentle relief that's important to your health. So whenever you're in pain, don't experiment with drugs that have not stood the test of time. Instead, use something that millions know from experience is completely dependable. Genuine Bayer aspirin. When you buy, ask for it by its full name, Bayer aspirin, not just for aspirin alone. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. And And now, back to Mr. Chameleon and the case of murder and the scar-faced man. Apparently unaware of the menace of Kimberly and Ellers, heads of Transcontinental Engineering, Mr. Chameleon, investigating the murder of the scar-faced man, has centered activities on the trade school for ex-convicts. And now, Detective Sergeant Dave Arnold has disappeared, and Chameleon is following a lead to the Fifth Avenue residence of Mrs. Essex Smith, where a butler ushers him to a beautifully dressed society woman who is saying,
I'm very glad to meet you, Mr. Chameleon. Won't you sit down?
Thank you, Mrs. Essex Smith. Perhaps you've read the newspaper stories about the murder of the scar-faced man.
Why, yes, but why do you come to me, Mr. Chameleon?
Well, my associate, Detective Sergeant Arnold, has disappeared. And our only clue is your name, written in his handwriting.
Oh, don't understand. How could a sordid murder have any connection with me?
Can't you think of any reason why Detective Sergeant Arnold had your name?
The only thing I can imagine is that I had a handyman who worked for me some years ago. He seems to fit the description in the papers of this scar-faced person.
What happened to this handyman, Mrs. Essex Smith?
I really don't know. And the housekeeper who hired him is gone, left a year ago.
I see. Mrs. Essex Smith, do you know anything about the Transcontinental Engineering Company, headed by Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ellers?
Transcontinental? Only that I have a few shares in it. I recall my brokers had it on their 6-month statement of my securities.
I beg your pardon, madam.
What is it, Robert?
This wireless message just came for you.
Oh, thank you, Robert. That will be all.
Yes, madam.
Will you excuse me while I look at this message, Mr. Chameleon?
Yes, of course.
Oh, my.
Well, not bad news, I hope.
Oh, no, but I must start making plans. This wireless message is from the ship, Etonia. An old friend, the Countess of Brackenburg, is about to visit me.
Well, then I shan't keep you any longer, Mrs. Essex Smith.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me to talk with the great Mr. Chameleon.
Well, thank you very much for your cooperating, Mrs. Essex Smith. And goodbye. Hello, Commissioner. This is Chameleon again. Any word from Dave?
Oh, nothing, Chameleon, nothing. Where are you?
I'm in a phone booth, round the corner from Mrs. Essex Smith. I want a wireless message checked. It came for Mrs. Essex Smith from this ship, Etonia, from a Countess of Breckenburg.
Uh-huh.
Now, will you see if it's on the up and up, please?
All right, Chameleon. Anything else?
Yes, Commissioner. Have that Transcontinental Trade School turned upside down for Dave Arnold.
You think he's there?
Tell you the truth, Commissioner, I don't know where he is. I'm only hoping.
Where are you going?
Back to the Transcontinental Engineering offices. I want to see Kimberly and Ellers again. See if they know anything about this Mrs. Essex Smith.
Watch your step, Chameleon. Those offices are dangerously near the trade school.
Don't worry, Commissioner. Just get the men to the trade school and find Dave Arnold. I'll go there as soon as I get through with Kimberly and Ellers.
Well, Mr. Chameleon, we hardly expected to see you again.
Mr. Kimberly, my investigation has led me to a Mrs. Essex Smith. Do you or Mr. Ellers know anything about her?
Mrs. Essex Smith? No, I never heard of her.
Any reason why we should know her, Mr. Chameleon?
She's a stockholder in your company.
Well, we have hundreds of stockholders, Mr. Chameleon. We know only a few of them.
I expected as much. Goodbye, Mr. Kimberly.
Goodbye, Mr. Chameleon.
There you are. Chameleon snooping here again. I'm telling you, Kimberly, you're an idiot having Scarface killed.
Take it easy, Ellis. Someone is waiting for Chameleon right now.
You mean?
Precisely. It's all arranged. Mr. Chameleon will be dead within 10 minutes.
And so Mr. Chameleon walks toward the trade school for ex-convicts, little knowing that in a dark doorway a man is waiting for him, when suddenly...
Your number's up, Chameleon!
Well, my friend, you're the one who's done for, not me. Oh, it's Hackett, is it? Gangster and dope peddler. Well, your boss must be getting nervous to try to have me killed.
Mr. Chameleon, say you're a sight for sore eyes.
Dave! I'd about given you up.
The boys got me out of that trade school. Those hoods killed Billy Wright and had me tied up on the top floor. Well, what next?
Back to headquarters, Dave. to see that dowager you unearthed, Mrs. Essex Smith. I'm getting closer and closer to the head of this gang.
Seems like they're getting closer and closer to us.
Now, at police headquarters, we hear...
Mrs. Essex Smith is here, Mr. Chameleon. She's pretty sore.
Oh, show her in, Dave.
All right, Mrs. Essex Smith.
Mr. Chameleon.
Mrs. Essex Smith, sit down, won't you?
I haven't time. No, I'm willing to cooperate with the police, but an imposition...
The wireless message, Mrs. Essex Smith. The wireless message.
What are you talking about, Mr. Chameleon?
The wireless that you received from the ship Atonia, saying that the Countess of Breckenburg was arriving as your guest.
But what about it?
It was a phony wireless message. There was no Countess of Breckenburg on the ship Atonia.
How dare you?
Behind that imposing front of yours, Mrs. Essex Smith, you've been working with a huge criminal organization operating from the Transcontinental Trade School.
No,
I have enough on you now to send you to prison for a long stretch.
This is ridiculous.
I even connect you with the murder of Scarface.
Mr. Chameleon, no, I beg of you. The disgrace.
Well, you should have thought of that before, Mrs. Essex Smith. Now, the truth from you. The truth or prison.
I was a fool. I'd lost all my money, Mr. Chameleon. I hardly knew how I'd live. And then they approached me.
Who?
A man named Grimes. He said all I would have to do would be to transfer wireless messages I received from ships to him.
Is that Grimes the same man who was in charge at the trade school?
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
What was the purpose of the messages?
I don't know.
Who are the leaders of the organization?
I don't know that either. Maybe Grimes.
Who else?
I don't know. I don't know. All I did was transmit those messages. Oh, can you see how I was taken in, Mr. Chameleon? Can't you help me?
I can do this, Mrs. Essex Smith. I can try to get you out, if you cooperate.
Tell me how, Mr. Chameleon. I want to break away from that terrible man, Grimes.
All I want you to do, Mrs. Essex Smith, is to hire me as your new butler.
My butler?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see. It's one of your tricks, Mr. Chameleon, to disguise yourself as my butler.
Quite right, Mrs. Essex Smith.
I'll be glad to help, Mr. Chameleon. And I'll be eternally grateful if you get me out of this horrible thing.
Very well, then you may go home. I shall be at your house at 6 tonight, as your new butler. My name will be Harkness.
Yes. Goodbye, Mr. Chameleon. And thank you.
Dave!
What is it, Mr. Chameleon?
Dave, release a story to the newspapers that a prominent dowager is to be arrested as an accomplice in the murder of Scarface. That she won't get a long sentence because she's talked to the police.
What are you up to, Mr. Chameleon?
I'm going to smoke out the leaders of this crime ring, Dave. I'm going to get the goods on them at Mrs. Essex Smith's house in the disguise of her new butler, named Harkness.
Good evening, madam. I'm Harkness, the new butler.
Are you really Mr. Chameleon, the detective? I'd never have known you.
It might be more convincing if you forgot who I really am, Mrs. Essex Smith.
What should I do?
Nothing, madam. Merely retire to a safe spot if any trouble starts. Oh, visitor. I'll answer. Good evening, sir.
Good evening.
Is Mrs. Essex Smith expecting you, sir?
No, she isn't.
What name shall I say, sir?
Grimes.
Yes, Mr. Grimes. You just come this way. You wait in here, Mr. Grimes. I shall tell Mrs. Essex Smith that you're here.
You can drop the act, Chameleon. I know who you are, and I'm going to rub you out.
No, you don't.
Oh, you dirty.
What is it? What? Oh, he's dead. Grimes is dead.
Yes, I just killed him. He's dead, Mrs. Essex Smith. He found out that I was the butler, and he tried to kill me. Oh, there's the doorbell again. Now, Mrs. Essex Smith, you come with me. Close the door so no one sees Grimes' body.
I can't.
Come along.
Oh, all right, Mr. Chameleon.
Now, you stay here with me and greet your visitors, Mrs. Essex Smith.
Yes, Mr. Chameleon.
Madam, you mean very well Harkness. Oh, your visitors are impatient. I shall open the door.
Where is Mrs. Essex Smith?
Who wishes to see, madam?
Never mind.
But I must insist.
The names are Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ellers. Now take us to Mrs. Essex Smith.
Who is it, Harkness?
A Mr. Kimberly and Mr. Ellers.
Oh, there you are, my dear Mrs. Essex Smith.
I beg your pardon. I don't know you.
Don't know us? After that story in the papers about you talking to the police to get yourself off?
Yes, and after some pal sent us this note saying you had information that we were the head of the ring, the top killers.
Quiet, you fools.
Sure, and let you pin the whole bloody racket on us.
We'll kill you, Essex Smith, before we let you testify.
You idiots, do you want this butler to hear you?
Too late, Mrs. Essex Smith. Hands up, both of you.
Chameleon. The butler's Chameleon.
That's right, Kimberly. And now I have my evidence that the huge crime organization that murdered the Scar-faced man operated from the offices belonging to you and Ellers.
That's a lie.
You killed Scarface because he was organizing a rival gang, including the hoodlums that you had massacred in the warehouse.
No.
Your main business was dope, and the trade school was a cover for your gang.
You have no proof, Chameleon.
No proof, Kimberly. Mrs. Essex Smith received a phony wire from the Shippertonia, signed by a countess who did not exist. We traced that wire and nabbed the woman who sent it. She was one of your gang, and she talked.
She's lying, whoever she is.
Through her tip, we nabbed a luxury yacht, owned by you and your firm, picking up a bundle thrown from the Shippertonia near Ambrose Light. That bundle contained dope.
I told you to stop that shipment, Kimberly.
Oh, shut up, Ellers.
Mr. Chameleon, you know that all I did was pass those messages.
I know, Mrs. Essex Smith. You passed on messages from the various dope-bearing ships. Messages signed with fancy, phony names, countesses and such, which actually told when and where dope was coming in. But more than that, you were the leader of this ring.
No, that's a lie.
Don't listen to her. You're right, Chameleon.
Why should we take the whole rap when she's the boss?
Yes, Mrs. Essex Smith is the boss.
Thank you, Ellers and Kimberly. I expected you to do exactly what you did. Turn on Mrs. Essex Smith when you thought she was double-crossing you.
What?
I planted that newspaper story, and also the phony message that Mrs. Essex Smith was going to pin the whole job on you. I knew that would flush you out, bring you here to kill her.
Chameleon, you sniveling sneak.
No, not me. You, Mrs. Essex Smith. You pretended to cooperate with me. Actually, you told Grimes that I'd be here as your butler and ordered him to come and kill me.
And he almost got you.
No, indeed. I was ready for him. You see, I knew who and what you were. All I wanted was the evidence and the full bag of your whole crime ring, including Kimberly and Ellers. Now, all three of you get going. The joyride is over for your syndicate.
And with these words, Mr. Chameleon concludes tonight's murder case. Here's how to relieve a common early morning headache quickly. Instantly you get up, take 2 Bayer aspirin tablets with water. Chances are by the time you finish dressing, your headache is gone. Bayer aspirin tablets work quickly because they start to disintegrate within 2 seconds after you take them. You can see this amazing 2-second disintegrating action with your own eyes by dropping a Bayer aspirin tablet in a glass of water. What it does in the water, it does in your stomach. And because it's ready to go to work almost at once, you get really fast relief. In addition, you get dependable relief. Of all pain relievers, none can match Bayer aspirin's record of use by millions of normal people without ill effect. So be sure to buy Bayer aspirin. Get the 100-tablet bottle, and you get Bayer aspirin tablets for less than a penny apiece. Listen next Wednesday night at this same time for Mr. Chameleon in the Snapshot in the Park murder case. The part of Mr. Chameleon is played by Karl Swenson, with dialogue by Carol Warner Gluck, from the original story by Frank and Ann Hummert. Music directed by Victor Arden. Your announcer is Warren Sweeney.
To millions, tooth decay means suffering, worry, expense. But now, thanks to a remarkable scientific discovery, you can actually cut down tooth decay simply by using new ammoniated Dr. Lyon's tooth powder. Based on a formula developed by University of Illinois scientists, it actually destroys bacterial Lactobacillus acidophilus, which cause tooth decay. As a result, dentists by the thousands recommend this type dentifrice. So to cut down tooth decay, to have sounder, healthier, handsomer teeth, use ammoniated Dr. Lyon's tooth powder. Both regular Dr. Lyon's tooth powder and new ammoniated Dr. Lyon's are at all drug and toilet goods counters.
Listen for Mr. Chameleon in the Snapshot in the Park murder case next Wednesday night at the same time. This is CBS, the Columbia Broadcasting System.
Welcome back. Mr. Chameleon usually goes up against upper-class sorts of criminals. It's kind of fun to have him take on the mob. He's only gone toe-to-toe with these sort of people maybe 2 or 3 times, but in my opinion, these are among his best cases. And you even get a case with Dave Arnold getting into genuine peril. I did like the fact that Chameleon's disguise was betrayed by the head of the mob, rather than it being a lucky guess or this guy piercing it, because I thought it was actually a really good voice. Of course, it could be possible for criminals to catch on, get smart, and say, as some listeners have suggested, she's got a new butler. Chameleon's a master of disguise. Let's add this up. Thankfully, that didn't happen this week. Well, now we turn to listener comments and feedback, and we start out with a comment regarding the hasty marriage murder case. Over on Instagram, NJC Eats writes, "You're going into disguise? Was that weary resignation from Dave this week?" The hokier the better, Mr. Chameleon. Love the podcast, Adam. Thank you for all your hard work. Well, thank you so much, NJC. And I guess that in this case, Dave Arnold is the perfect audience stand-in. And then I have an email from Ken, who writes that he found the podcast through recommendation from Sirius XM. Well, thanks for that. And he writes, "I'd never heard of Mr. Chameleon, but it is becoming my favorite show. It has a strong vibe of Mr. Keen, Tracer of Lost Persons, and I appreciate your explanation of that. I had to write you to talk about the episode, The Ailing Wife Murder Case. My favorite part of that episode, besides Mr. Chameleon yelling at everyone, was the oddly specific alibi the bookkeeper and her uncle came up with that Chameleon did not like and used as a pretense to lock them up. Only it turns out they were both apparently telling the truth, but Chameleon never apologized or commented on that." Well, Ken, it has to be said that being Mr. Chameleon means never having to say you're sorry. Ken continues on. Then we add the mystery of the uncle and the ailing wife's brother who showed up from Atlantic City knowing each other. Again, no one even mentioned that later. Then we find out that the brother threw the murder weapon into the trash can in the hall of his hotel in Atlantic City. And for some reason, the hotel porter was at the airport when the brother took off and landed. I ended up listening to it twice to make sure I'd not missed something, but no. It would not have been surprising if the ailing wife was found to have confessed to the murder by having the fact tattooed on her back. All in all, the plot was utterly preposterous, even without Chameleon in a disguise, but it was very entertaining, and I look forward to more episodes. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you so much, Ken. And then we also have some YouTube comments. And we'll start with Saysoff, who writes, and again quotes the dialogue, "Every time I put the necklace on, something bad happens." Saysoff suggestion, maybe you should quit putting it on then. Exactly. I mean, if a piece of jewelry even gives me a rash or gets too tight, I will at least put it aside, at least temporarily, and I don't have any jewelry, at least not that I know of, that brings death and disaster to those around me. So that was a bit of a hole in her story. And then we have this comment from Slanky, who writes, "Every time I listen to a Mr. Chameleon episode, I hope he won't be the worst cop ever. I'm disappointed every time." Ouch. On the other hand, Catherine says, "This is a very good episode. No disguise and not enough Dave Arnold, but still fun." And then Betsy says, "As usual, thank you so much. If I ever win the lottery, I will send a big chunk of it your way." All right, holding you to that. No, not really. Thank you so much. Appreciate the sentiment, Betsy. Well, now it's time to thank our Patreon supporter of the day. And I want to go ahead and thank Christine. Christine has been one of our Patreon supporters since November 2018, currently supporting the podcast at the Seamus level of $4 or more per month. Thank you so much for your support, Christine. And that will actually do it for today. If you're enjoying the podcast, please follow us using your favorite podcast software, and be sure to rate and review the podcast wherever you download it from. We'll be back next Thursday with another episode of Mr. Chameleon, but join us back here tomorrow for yours truly, Johnny Dollar, where...
Yes, well, Mr. Preen, I understand you aren't entirely satisfied with the efforts the police are making to find your wife.
And you understand correctly. They have done nothing but ask me the same asinine questions over and over again. Have you talked with them?
No, sir. I felt that I should see you first, get all the information you have.
I will cooperate with you all the way, Mr. Dollar.
All right. When exactly did she disappear?
Just 10 days ago. She'd come down from our place up at Lake Arrowhead, where she'd spent Saturday and Sunday.
Uh-huh.
We had planned on going up together that weekend, but I developed a cold.
Oh?
The evening she returned, I retired earlier than usual, and then when I awoke about 11:30 that night, she wasn't in her room. I called to her, searched the grounds, then waited up.
I hope you'll be with us then. In the meantime, send your comments to box13@greatdetectives.net. Follow us on Twitter at Radio Detectives, and check us out on Instagram. Instagram.com/greatdetectives. From Boise, Idaho, this is your host, Adam Graham, signing off.